The Case of Jennie Brice by Mary Roberts Reinhardt. Read by Ghosty Keys. Chapter 10. I have said before that I do not know anything about the law. I believe that the Ladley case was unusual in several ways. Mr. Ladley had once been well known in New York among the people who frequent the theaters, and Jennie Brice was even better known. A good many lawyers, I believe, said that the police had not a leg to stand on, and I know the case was watched with much interest by the legal profession. People wrote letters to the newspapers protesting against Mr. Ladley being held, and I believe that the district attorney, in taking him before the grand jury, hardly hoped to make a case. But he did, to his own surprise, I fancy, and the trial was set for May. But in the meantime, many curious things happened. In the first place, the week following Mr. Ladley's arrest, my house was filled up with 8 or 10 members of the company of the Gaiety Theater, very cheerful and jolly and well-behaved. 3 men, I think, and the rest girls. One of the men was named Bellows, John Bellows, and it turned out he had known Jennie Brice very well. From the moment that he learned that Mr. Holcomb hardly left him, he walked to the theater with him, and he waited to walk home again. He took him out to restaurants and for long streetcar rides in the morning, and on the last night of their stay, Saturday, they got gloriously drunk together. Mr. Holcomb, no doubt, in his character of Ladley, and he came reeling in at 3 a.m. singing. Poor Holcomb was very sick the next day, but by Monday he was all right, and he called me into the room. "We've got him, Mrs. Pittman, we've got him." He looked mottled but cheerful. "As sure as God made little fishes, we've got him." But that's all he would say. It seemed he was going to New York, and he might be gone for almost a month. "I've no family," he said, "and enough money to keep me. If I find my relaxation in hunting down criminals, well, it's a harmless and cheap enough amusement, and it's my own business." And so he went away that night, and I must admit, I missed him. I rented the parlor bedroom the next day to a school teacher, and I found the periscope affair very handy. I could see just how much gas she used. And although the notice on the door forbids cooking and washing in the rooms, I found she was doing both, making coffee and boiling an egg in the morning, rubbing out stockings and handkerchiefs in her washbowl. I'd much rather have men boarders than women. Women are always lighting alcohol lamps on the bureau and wanting the bed turned down. Well, with Mr. Holcomb gone, and Mr. Reynolds busy all day and half the night getting out the summer silks and preparing for Remnant Day, and with Mr. Ladley in jail and light out of the city, for I saw in the papers that she was not well and that her mother had taken her to Bermuda. And so I had a good bit of time on my hands. And so I got into the habit of thinking things over and trying to draw my own conclusions as I had seen Mr. Holcomb do. I would sit down and I would write things out as they happened and study them over. And especially I worried over how he could have found a slip of paper in Mr. Ladley's room with a list, almost exact, of the things we had discovered there. I've read it over many times now. Rope, knife, shoe, towel, horn, and get more and more bewildered each time. Horn might have been a town, or it might not have been. There was such a town, according to Mr. Graves, but apparently he had made nothing of it. Was it a town that was meant? The dictionary only gave a few meanings for horn: hornet, hornblende, hornpipe, horny. None of those were any help. And then one morning I happened to see the personal column of one of the newspapers that a woman named Eliza Schaefer of Horner had day-old Buff Orpington and Plymouth Rock chicks for sale. I guess those are chickens. And it started puzzling me again. Perhaps it had been Horner, and possibly this very Eliza Schaefer. I suppose my lack of experience was in my favor, for after all, Eliza Schaefer is a common enough name, and the horn might have stood for Hornswoggle for all I knew. The story of the man who thought of what he would do if he were a horse came back to me, and for an hour or so I tried to think like I was Jennie Brice, trying to get away and hide from my rascal husband. But I made no headway. I would never have gone to Horner or any small town if I wanted to hide. I think I should have gone around the corner and taken a room in my own neighborhood, or lost myself in a big city. It was that same day that, since I did not go to Horner, Horner came to me. The bell rang at about 3 o'clock, and I answered it myself, for with times hard and only 2 or 3 roomers all winter, I didn't have a servant except for Terry to do odd jobs for some months. And there stood a fresh-faced young girl with a covered basket in hand. "Are you Mrs. Pittman?" she asked. "Well, I don't need anything today," I said, and I tried to shut the door. And at that minute something in the basket cheeped. Young women selling poultry are not common in the neighborhood. "What have you there?" I asked. "Chicks, day-old chicks, but I'm not trying to sell you any. May I come in?" And so it began to dawn on me. That this, perhaps, might be Eliza Schaefer. While I led her back to the dining room with Peter sniffing at her basket. "My name is Schaefer. I've seen your name in the papers, and I believe I know something about Jennie Brice." Well, her story was curious. She said she was the postmistress at Horner and lived with her mother on a farm about a mile out of town, driving in and out each day in a buggy. On Monday afternoon, March the 5th, the woman had alighted at the station from a train and had taken luncheon at the hotel. She told the clerk she was on the road selling corsets, and she was much disappointed to find no store of any size in the town. The woman, who had registered as Mrs. Jane Bellows, said she was tired and would like to rest for a day or two on the farm. Well, she was told to see Eliza Schaefer at the post office, and as a result, drove out with her to the farm after the last mail came that evening. Asked to describe her, she was over medium height, light-haired, quick in her movements, and wore a black and white striped dress with a red collar and a hat to match. She carried a brown, small valise that Miss Schaefer presumed contained her samples. Well, Mrs. Schaefer made her welcome, although they did not usually take boarders until June. She had not eaten supper and asked that she might have a pen and ink, and had written a letter. The letter was not mailed until Wednesday, but all of Tuesday Mrs. Bellows spent in her room, and Mrs. Schaefer had driven to the village in the afternoon with word that she had been crying all day. Bought her some headache medicine. On Wednesday morning, she appeared at breakfast. She ate heartily and picked up, and then asked Miss Schaefer to take her letter to the post office. It was addressed to Mr. Ellis Howe, in care of a Pittsburgh newspaper. That night, when Eliza went home, about 8:30, the woman was gone. She had paid for her room and had been driven as far as Thornville, where all trace of her was lost. On account of the disappearance of Jennie Brice being published shortly after that, she and her mother had driven to Thornville, but the station agent there was surly as well as stupid. They learned nothing about the woman there. Since that time, 3 men had made inquiries about the woman in question. One had a pointed Van Dyke beard. The second, from the description I fancied, must have been Mr. Graves. And the third, without a doubt, was Mr. Howe. Eliza Schaefer said that this last man seemed half frantic. I brought her a photograph of Jennie Brice as Topsy, and another as Juliet. She said there was a resemblance, but it ended there. But of course, Mr. Graves had said that by the time an actress gets her photograph retouched to suit her, it hardly resembles her. And unless I had known Jennie Brice myself, I should hardly have recognized the pictures. But in spite of all that, it appeared certain that Jennie Brice had spent 3 days living here after her disappearance. That should clear Mr. Ladley. But what had Mr. Howe to do with all of this? Why had he not told the police of the letter from Horner, or about the woman on the bridge? And why had Mr. Bronson, who was likely the man with the pointed beard, said nothing? I did as I thought Mr. Holcomb would have wished me to do. I wrote down on a clean sheet of notepaper everything that Eliza Schaefer had said. Her description of the black and white dress, the woman's height, and the rest. And then I took her to the courthouse, chicks and all, and made her tell her story again to one of the district attorneys. The young man was interested, but not convinced. He took her story down, and she signed it. He was smiling as he bowed us out, and I turned in the doorway. Well, this will free Mr. Ladley, I suppose. Not just yet. This makes just 11 places where Jennie Brice has spent the first 3 days after her death. But I can positively identify the dress. My good woman, that dress has been described to the last stitch arch and colonial volt in every newspaper in the United States. That evening, the newspapers announced that during a conference at the jail between Mr. Ladley and James Bronson, business manager at the Liberty Theater, Mr. Ladley had attacked Mr. Bronson with a chair.